More than likely, I believe that most people would say that it would be unthinkable to say that God would seek out and try to target anybody, that God would try to deliberately hurt or victimize someone. But in many ways, that was the prevailing belief in Jesus' time to some extent. So if you were the victim of a disaster or a catastrophe, if you were suffering from some kind of chronic disease or some kind of incurable malady, or if poverty reduced you to either begging or slavery, then it must have been you or some member of your family that did something to warrant God's anger. So in today's gospel, people assume that those people that were massacred in the temple by Pilate's soldiers during what the Romans perceived as a revolt, or those workers that were killed when the tower they were building collapsed on them, all of those that died, they must have been some kind of horrible sinners. You know what Jesus says to them in reply? He says, nonsense. Neither good fortune nor calamity are indicators of one's favor or disfavor with God. God will judge the hearts of every soul, regardless of the situation in life. When I think about it, I honestly think, have things changed that much, though? When I think of our modern sensibilities, we're so quick to dismiss people like the homeless or the refugees or the addicts or those abused with the same kind of condescending attitude. Gosh, look at the situation they're in. They really messed up their lives to be in this kind of situation. So Jesus offers them, and Jesus offers us, this wonderful parable about the fig tree. Do you know what the parable of the fig tree is sometimes called? And you probably didn't know this. It's called the Gospel of Second Chances. And I like that too, and I think of it often. I never thought much about this gospel until I came to this parish. There are a lot of good fig growers out there, a lot of good people that have good fig trees and take a lot of tending to it, and I reap the rewards of much of the fruit of a lot of those good fig trees. But in this example of this parable, like the merciful and compassionate gardener, God continues to see our work and calls forth that goodness within each of us, even if we don't see it in ourselves. The fig tree is an invitation to hope in the unlimited love of God. We always live in the hope and peace of God, who keeps on giving us those second chances to rise from the ashes of sin, to rebuild, to reform our lives. The life of God is always about starting over again, about recreation, about growth and discovery, about really utilizing the grace from God to make things right. God's love for us is constant, it's unconditional, and it's limitless. So the fig tree is a parable of crisis, but also compassion. Now the fig tree draws strength and sustenance from the soil. But in this gospel, that fig tree produces nothing in return. And so it's seen that its only value would be to be firewood. A similar fate then, awaits those who squander their lives in greedy, selfish pursuits. But God is described as the ever-patient gardener who gives every fig tree whatever time, whatever care, whatever attention it needs until the harvest is realized. Sometimes we are that fig tree in need of the care of a compassionate gardener, and other times we are that gardener who has been entrusted to provide a fig tree of our own with reason for hope and cultivation of its gifts so that they soon may realize the harvest promise that they are capable of. You know, in today's first reading, God reveals to Moses, he's revealed it in a similar way, in Deadwood, perhaps we could say. As he is tending his father-in-law's flock, Moses sees a piece of dried sagebrush catching fire, and that's not an uncommon sight in the scorching desert plain. But this fire continues to burn brilliantly. And then Moses hears a voice calling from the fire, and in the burning bush, God is revealed as the Holy One who transcends time and space. He said, "I am who am," and calls Moses then to lead the Israelites out of their bondage in Egypt to a land flowing with milk and honey. And as God called Moses from his flocks to Horeb, God calls us to work on the shepherding of leading one another through our own exodus from brokenness to wholeness, from despair to hope, and from death to resurrection. The Exodus story was a defining moment in Judaism, and the first Christians continued to be inspired by that journey of Moses and their ancestors from Egyptian captivity to freedom, to live their identity as God's people in the land that became now called Israel. Now in the gospel of Jesus, they saw God calling them to a new exodus, a journey from the desert of sin to God's promised land of resurrection. You know, for Paul, Jesus was that new Moses, and baptism was our way from passage through the Red Sea, and the Eucharist was their Passover. And in the second reading that we heard today, Paul invokes the memory of Israel's Exodus to admonish the Christian community to a new Israel, to remain faithful to their baptismal covenant as they continue their own Exodus in the reign of God. So we speak today of second chances, of new journeys, of God speaking to us in amazing ways like through burning bushes, for God rescuing those things that seem to be dying and lifting them up. The readings for this Sunday that falls around the midpoint of Lent, calls us to realize that we are forever held in the heart of a God whose love knows no limits